not speaking with other lectins, so bear with me. George Augustus Sala, who worked alongside Dickens for many years, once observed of the author, what he liked to talk about was the latest new piece at the theatres, the latest exciting trial or police case, the latest social craze or social swindle, and especially the latest murder. Dickens was of course not only interested in crime, but the criminals, in criminal acts and their consequences. At one time he even considered becoming a metropolitan magistrate. The literary tradition in which he chose to work, influenced by Newgate novels, the picaresque, the gothic and theatrical melodrama, was rich in violence, villainy and mystery. There are secrets, sinister strangers, long-lost wills, plots against innocence, and concealed pasts throughout his work. It is not surprising then that criminals, rogues, villains and other wrongdoers populate the pages of all his novels. Dickens' career as a novelist has been divided into two major phases. The early novels often depict the suffering or outcast child, unprotected and ripe for exploitation, powerfully symbolising the vulnerability of the individual in a hostile world. In these early novels, the angelic children, such as Oliver, Nell or Florence, are threatened by the villains and rogues they encounter, but retain their purity and their power to love. The resolution of these novels usually involves the restoration of the threatened character, now rescued from the malevolent forces, rescued into a community of love and protection, although never without cost or sacrifice. In the second phase of his career, the protagonists of Dickens' late novels may not have quite the fragility of the child, but they inhabit a society that is increasingly fragmented. There is less hope for a resolution in which society may be harmoniously reformed. These are novels featuring more complex protagonists, no less imperilled by the villains and rogues around them, but where more banal forms of suffering or emotional barrenness feature, as well as spectacular instances of crime. The eminent critic Barbara Hardy has observed that Dickens' novels reveal a division between the society he rejects and the humanity he believes in. In the later novels, she says, Dickens creates such a powerful anatomy of a corrupting and corrupted society, ruled and moved by greed and ambition, that the wish-fulfilling fantasies of virtue, rescue or rehabilitation become harder to sustain. While Dickens has famously been described as a radical moralist, he is not, however, an optimistic moralist, despite the restoration of order in the form of the happy family circle that often concludes his novels. In Dickens' novels, the good characters seem to only have the power to forgive. They are not endowed with the power to right wrongs or restore justice. They are almost passive in their goodness. At best, they are rewarded for their virtue with a home from which evil has been removed. Moreover, Dickens seems pessimistic about the psychology of the villain or criminal. Many of his villains seem born with being evil. Wrongdoing is a life practice rather than an isolated act of crime or unethical conduct. Psyche's murder of Nancy, for instance, is the climax of a lifetime of brutality and violence. As one critic put it, characters in Dickens grow into what they have always been. And if they eventually meet their downfall, it is not usually because of the intervention of human justice. Steerforth drowns in a storm, Carker's own fear drives him under the train, Headstone dies a suicide murderer, Ralph Nickleby hangs himself in the attic where his son had been imprisoned. The rehabilitation of wrongdoers is rare in the world of Dickens. As Juliet John has noted in her book Dickens' Villains, it has often been a commonplace in Dickens' criticism to dismiss his villains as melodramatic and stagey, while at the same time praising his complex understanding of deviant psychology. Dickens' lifelong love of the theatre and all forms of dramatic entertainment is clearly evident in some of his rogues and villains, and many of the illustrations of these characters often seem more like characters from melodrama or pantomime. This paradox in Dickens' representations of human evil fluctuating between the larger-than-life caricatures and the more subtle, complex and calculating evildoers, has left us with a rich panoply of characters, depicted with widely differing degrees of realism and variations of tone by their creator. From the vicious Bill Sikes in Oliver Twist, to the serpentinely servile Uriah Heep in David Copperfield, to the malevolently volatile Quilp of the old curiosity shop, who, despite manifesting evil designs on Little Nell, never commits a major crime, and so can be represented more indulgently by Dickens. Grotesque, repellent and sadistic, Quilp is like a pantomime villain. He is, we're told by Dickens that he ate hard eggs, shells and all, devoured gigantic prawns with their heads and tails on, drank boiling tea without winking, and he repeatedly expostulates, "I hate your virtuous people. I hate 'em, every one." From the beginning, illustrators and readers alike have been drawn to Dickens' grotesque and theatrical villains, like Fagin or Scrooge, who have continued to grace stage and screen. Most recently, Rowan Atkinson has starred as Fagin in the latest production of Oliver in London's West End, while Jim Carrey is set to appear as a 3D Scrooge in Disney's Christmas Carol. For me, however, Dickens' most chilling victims and rogues are those who are found in the most respectable family circles. For example, Harold Skimpole, the dandyish figure from Bleak House, who cultivates a childish irresponsibility, elevates art over life, and like an actor can charm an audience so successfully that many characters seem unable to see through him. While some characters see him as a harmless innocent, Skimpole's amoral and mercenary manipulation of others, such as the tragic Richard, makes him one of Dickens' most repellent rogues. Egoism and selfishness were always high on Dickens' list of human culpabilities, as was the cultivation of the kind of romantic individualism that would disavow any social obligations or responsibilities for the lives of others. Skimpole's pronouncement on the system of plantation slavery in America is a telling instance of the immoral implications of his solipsistic perspective. He says, "I dare say theirs is an unpleasant experience on the whole, but they people the landscape for me. They give it a poetry for me, and perhaps that is one of the pleasanter objects of their existence." Another example of a villain motivated solely by self-interest is Paul Dombey the Elder in Dombey and Sons. Far from the apparently upright and prosperous paterfamilias he appears to the outside world, Dombey sees his own wife and daughter as a threat to his power and security. A symbol of heartless patriarchal authority, Dombey finally turns on the angelic Florence. He, quote, "lifted up his cruel arm and struck her crosswise with such heaviness that she tottered on the marble floor." Male violence directed at those closest to them is a recurring concern for Dickens. While unlike Bill Sikes, Dombey is not strictly a murderer, his action here is described as, quote, "murdering that fond idea to which his daughter had held in spite of him. She saw his cruelty, neglect and hatred dominant above it and stamping it down." Dickens' eventual rehabilitation of Dombey through his financial downfall and personal humiliation may still strike 21st century readers as an uneasy resolution to the threat he has posed for over 700 pages, and he remains for me another of Dickens' most charmless villains. But perhaps Dickens' most complex depiction of villainy is found in the character of Bradley Headstone in Our Mutual Friend, a conflicted character who's almost a Jekyll and Hyde figure, decent school teacher by day, but subject to an increasingly frenzied and obsessive pursuit of his victim. Headstone is treated more as a case of abnormal psychology, endowed with symptoms such as fits and nosebleeds, subject to extreme emotional responses. Further, his motives are complicated. Sexual jealousy exacerbated by class feelings. After his murderous attempt on Eugene Wrayburn, he is haunted as much by the fear that he had not succeeded as by the guilt that he had.